So then we are back with more understandings from the Renewed Covenant, from the Aramaic English translation of the Word. These documents are from the original manuscripts from the time of Moses, and mostly of the prophecies are related then with the Torah, and in our time we are at the second portion of Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, from the 23rd verse through the 44th, where we find then lots of prophets of old, such as Zechariah, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, and then Daniel. We find these prophets also, along with many others, speaking of the time of the end. Each of them, they have a particular view of a certain layer related then from the time of the Torah, the second portion, the autumn feast, and then until the closing of the age. So at the moment we can count Daniel, the prophet, Ezekiel, and then Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, and then we can count also the Shilishim in the future explaining the end. So then, understanding from the viewpoint of the prophets and what they told us, we understand the time of rebuilding, then Isaiah 61st chapter. And what many people don't understand is when Yeshayahu speaks of the city and the cities, he is related then with the Shaul, the Shaliach, when he was explaining to the Levitical priests of the second services of the Holy Tabernacles, speaking of the city, while they were building these cities, but always searching for the city. He was speaking then the perfect city yet to come, while they themselves were modeling from the city in the earth, precisely Jerusalem. So while then they have the representative of Shaul's time as the city, as Jerusalem, while he himself was delegating then and they were clustering, forming the cities. So when you read then Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, then you find the desolation of your cities. He's not speaking of the vicinities. He's speaking of the future cities going around the world forming holy tabernacles. So then, understanding from this viewpoint, then we understand the prophecies of then Daniel, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Zechariah, and Ezekiel. Precisely then would be Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, Zechariah, the 12th chapter, Daniel, then also the 12th chapter. And in many portions we find in Yirmiyahu also many of the prophecies related with the end of time. Each of those in a specific layer, and then before starting the reading of Revelation per the original manuscripts, not Greco-Roman junk, from the original manuscripts. Then you start with at least 12 layers. You have to understand how to link them, because the Messiah always spoke in layers. So the prophets. That's why the holy language is unique. So then, understanding the end of times and the time of restoration, time of renewal, rebuilding, we understand our position as the country being also involved with the rebuilding. Understanding also other nations, they are preparing themselves for war. But the calendar and then the agenda of Yahweh at the moment requests rebuilding. So there is a word, obviously, Many nations preparing for war. It's not time for war. The time of rebuilding. So nations spending their time with war tactics, it's not for this time. There are specific nations, for instance China, they're going to lead then the end trade. And they shouldn't spend much time playing war games and being overburdened with them. But rather, obviously, they should expand their trade, because this is what's coming. So it's a relief, because then Israel doesn't have to be so uptight regarding the events. Because as Yahweh has said, it's a time of rebuilding. But the main factor is establishing then a link from Israel and China directly. Then these would put their situation at ease. Because trade then takes hold of the entire Mideast. And then whosoever engages in war then is a scoundrel. Because each of the aims of those nations in the East, they want more trade. And China can provide the trade with a very reasonable price. So then when Israel then makes the first step in having strong friendships with China, then we can understand the peace would be established for some time. Because Yahweh has determined this time the time of rebuilding, not time for war. Shlimon said there's a time for war and time for peace. The time is for the restoration. And nations emerging, for instance, in development, they should never be Americanized. Always related with war, destruction. It's not the time. While then China has the entire length to do their trade, we are going to rebuild. Because the time is for refurbishment, rebuilding, restoration. Then please stay tuned, much more coming up, because then other areas are also involved with other parts of the prophecies. But at least we know where we stand regarding the Holy Scripture, the true Scripture. Please stay tuned.